Right, welcome everybody to this Centre for Democratic Futures seminar. It's our great pleasure today to introduce Sofia Näsström, whose book, The Spirit of Democracy, Corruption, Disintegration and Renewal, published by Oxford University Press in 2021, serves as the occasion for this event. Sofia is a professor of politics at the Uppsala University in the Department of Government, and she's just returned there after visiting Nuffield College, Oxford, where she was working on her next book, Democracy and the Social Question. To discuss Sofia's book, we have a very distinguished panel of guests. They will be presenting their comments in alphabetical order, so I'll introduce them in that order. So we start with Professor Jason Frank, who is the John L. Senior Professor of Government at Cornell University. Jason specializes in historically situated approaches to democratic theory, and his most recent book is The Democratic Sublime on Aesthetics and Popular Assembly, which was published by Oxford also in 2021. But of course, he may be best known for his 2010 book, Constituent Moments, Enacting the People in Post-Revolutionary America. Our second commentator is Mathias Koenig Archibougi, who is Associate Professor in Government at the LSE. Mathias has a wide range of interests. He's published a number of important collections with David Held on American power in the 21st century, Taming Globalization, Frontiers of Governance, but he has a particular interest in issues of global democracy and questions around the boundary problem. Our final commentator is Professor Nadia Urbinati. Nadia is professor at Columbia University and is, I guess, her most recent book in 2020, published by Harvard, was Me, the People, How Populism Transforms Democracy. But she's also published a number of other books, and quite recently, The Tyranny of the Moderns with Yale University Press, and Democracy Disfigured, Opinion, Truth and the People, again with Harvard in 2014. So it's a great pleasure to welcome this distinguished group to discuss Sofia's excellent book, which you can see here. We're going to proceed in the following way. Sofia will introduce the book for 10 or 15 minutes, and then each of our commentators will give 10 to 15 minutes of remarks, at which point we will offer Sofia a chance for any quick responses and then open it up to Q&A. Please note that we will be recording this session while the speakers are engaging, but the recording will stop so that the Q&A is not recorded. Please do keep yourself muted when you are not speaking, so we don't pick up any background noise or cats in my case, quite likely. With this, I will hand it across to Sofia to introduce The Spirit of Democracy.
Thank you, David, and thank you so much for inviting me to the Center for Democratic Futures. And thanks also to Jason, Nadia, and Mathias for taking the time to read and comment on my book. What is democracy? If you ask that question to political theorists, what is democracy, they usually answer in one of two ways. Either they say that democracy is a procedure for deliberating and making decisions under conditions of disagreement among equals, or they say that democracy means popular sovereignty. These two views are often contrasted, and the conflict concerns whether the final guarantor of democracy resides in laws and institutions or with the people itself. Today, when democracy is increasingly politicized, questioned by autocrats, populist leaders, and technocratic elites alike, this conflict on the meaning of democracy has attracted new attention. Some scholars try to hold on to procedures and compromises as the very core of democracy, whereas others argue that when core political institutions, such as elections, public media, or human rights, suffer from a loss of legitimacy or efficacy, power returns to the sovereign people who, like a sleeping sovereign, in Richard Tuck's terms, come alive and put things right again. The argument I make in this book is that democracy can neither be reduced to democratic procedure nor to the sovereign will of the people. Democracy is a spirit, in the sense that Montesquieu understood it in his classical work, The Spirit of Laws. Now, Montesquieu is perhaps most familiar for his thesis on the separation of powers, but the Spirit of Laws is above all an analysis of the spirit of three political forms: republics, monarchies, and despotism, and what it takes for them to endure and prosper over time: virtue in a republic, honor and distinction in a monarchy, and fear in a despotic form. So in this book, I draw on Montesquieu's concept of the spirit as a kind of conceptual framework for analyzing a political form that he himself never had the chance to study, the one that was born in the American French revolutions. And the overall argument I make in the book is that modern democracy is a distinct political form, animated and sustained by a spirit of emancipation. So the short presentation today will focus on 3 points. First, I will briefly recapitulate the core concept that I take from Montesquieu, the spirit. Second, I will clarify what I mean by the spirit of emancipation and how it differs from thinking of democracy in terms of popular sovereignty and proceduralism. Finally, I will very shortly spell out the significance of this interpretation when it comes to diagnose the corruption and renewal of democracy. So 3 points: the concept of spirit, the meaning of emancipation, and its corruption renewal. So in the Spirit of Laws, starting with the spirit, Montesquieu does not seek to ground the difference between political forms in an overarching moral law or foundation. So instead of following the great canon of political thought and asking what is the most legitimate or just political form, he asks what sustains different political forms even when they are patently illegitimate and patently unjust. And to many scholars, it is this unorthodox outlook on the world, not the moral outlook, that makes him the founder of both sociology and political science. What then does he mean by spirit? As I said, according to Montesquieu, there are 3 political forms: republic, monarchies, and despotism. And each form has its own nature and principle, and together they make up its distinct spirit. More specifically, he makes 2 central arguments that I draw upon in my book. First, he stresses that when categorizing different political forms, it is not enough to study the power of the people, the king, and the despot, or what he calls the nature of a political form, which basically means who governs and how. We must also, he says, look to the principles, the second term here in the concept of spirit, that underlie the power, or that which makes them act or sustain over time: virtue in a republic, honor, distinction, supremacy in a monarchy, and fear in a despotic form. Do people act on these principles? And do the laws, institutions, and policies in turn incite them to do so? That becomes the important question. Second, and this is important for my book, he stresses that virtue, distinction, and fear, they do not merely shore up the power of the people, the king, and the despot. They also extend into the everyday and social reality of ordinary people. So he's concerned with the social, not only the political. He says that these, if we call them spirit, they affect norms, practices, and manners, as well as matters of education, luxury, taxation, defense, commerce, and the condition of women. Today we would talk about social policies. So in order for a republic to endure over time, for example, it is not enough to focus on laws and institution. The people must prioritize the common good over their own private affairs, but not only vis-a-vis law. They must also cultivate the same spirit of virtue in education and taxation, for example, as well as in their everyday social practices. Not all the time and not everywhere, but enough to keep the republic alive. For were the inhabitants guided by a different spirit, for example, one of self-promotion and distinction at the expense of the common good, the republic will be jeopardized. It will soon peter out and give way to something akin to monarchical political form. That's Montesquieu. Montesquieu, he was concerned with the spirit of republics, monarchies, and despotism. My concern, however, is with democracy. What then is the spirit of democracy? This leads us to the second point, the idea of emancipation. Rousseau once wrote, "Were there a people of gods, their government would be democratic. But," he continues, "so perfect a government is not for humans." So Rousseau, he knew that it is difficult to be a good citizen. And this is what he means when he says that democracy is a government for gods. Humans are simply not virtuous enough. They care more about their private lives than the common good. But what Rousseau describes in the social contract is a republic, not a democracy. Democracy is a government for humans, not for gods, precisely because it allows us to be humans, fallible and prone to make mistakes. A democracy is not the same thing as a republic. It is a unique political form sustained and animated by emancipation. How can I make this claim? And what do I mean more exactly by emancipation? So I'm a political theorist, which means that I do not proceed historically or sociologically as Montesquieu himself did. What I try to do in this book is to reconstruct the symbolic meaning of the democratic revolution by asking what happens in the shift, in the revolutionary shift from monarchy to democracy. So the first chapter in the book is dedicated to the question, how do we, the people, which is the subject of the democratic revolution, emancipate itself from monarchy and become its own source of authority, as the revolutions promise? In modern political thought, the term emancipation has two familiar connotations that must be distinguished from how I use it in this book. First, emancipation is commonly associated with specific social groups emancipating themselves from a condition of slavery, capitalism, patriarchy, or racism. As Karl Marx famously put it, the emancipation of the working classes must be conquered by the working classes themselves. Second, the term emancipation is associated with the philosophy of the Enlightenment and its idea of emancipation as a matter of human reason or coming of age. We may think here of Kant's idea of enlightenment. In line with Montesquieu's understanding of spirit, however, the spirit of emancipation cannot be reduced to the emancipation of specific social groups, nor can it be extended to cover human reason per se. It has at once a more general and specific connotation. General, insofar as the spirit of emancipation refers to the overall spirit that makes a democracy tick, not only a specific group. And specific, insofar as this spirit cannot be universalized. It is distinct for a democratic political form. It does not cover republics, monarchies, and despotism. The democratic spirit of emancipation has two defining characteristics, and I will here present them very quickly in the form of 2 bullet points. I'm sure we're going to come back to this. It may be in the comments or in the Q&A. First, so what I mean by emancipation. First, with the removal of external guarantees in political affairs during the American French Revolution, divine, natural, and historical, there arises a fundamental uncertainty about the future. And in a democracy, we, the people, tame that uncertainty by sharing and dividing it equally. The freedom opened up by this move but also the responsibility it entails. It emancipates us from having the future decided for us. Second, the spirit of emancipation, so understood, opens up the purpose and direction of society to change. We assume the freedom to fail in our judgments and decisions and begin anew. Note that it is precisely these two aspects of the spirit of a democracy, its openness to the future and freedom to begin anew, that are threatened in countries that go from democracy to electoral autocracy. For what do the leaders in these countries do? They steal our future, to borrow a term by Shoshana Zuboff, and they refuse to step down. They don't allow us to begin anew. I started out by saying that the spirit of emancipation, or to understand democracy as a spirit, distinguishes itself from the idea of democracy as popular sovereignty or proceduralism. How? A couple of weeks ago, Viktor Orbán declared that his victory in the election in Hungary, I quote him, is quite funny, was so big you can see it from the moon. It was a victory, but was it a victory for democracy? The relevant question to ask to determine whether it was a victory for democracy or not is not, I argue, whether the election expresses the sovereign will of the people, or whether there are free and fair elections, including freedom of press, or all these sort of other rights. If we adopt a spirit-orientated understanding, peoples and procedures are not automatically democratic. It depends on the spirit that animates them. Is it emancipation? Is it honor and distinction, love of country and law, or fear? To put this a little provocatively, if the people in a democracy votes a despot into power, it is probably, or it is not democratic. It is democratic corrupted. It is more likely to be guided by fear or love of country and law than by emancipation. In the same way, there may be democratic procedures like elections, but if these elections are more about selecting the better ones into office than about giving the people the right to shape the future and start over, they are not democratic. So in the book, I have a chapter on elections. I'm sure that Nadia will come back to this, but the whole point is that peoples and procedures are not per se democratic. It depends on the spirit that animates them, how people act, and what kind of incentives these procedures or institutions create in society. Final point, this brings us to the last point, corruption and renewal. Today, the future is particularly uncertain, as we all aware, due to wars, pandemics, migration, climate change, and digitalization. So instead of creating reassurance and freedom by sharing and dividing it equally by means of institutions, the uncertainty that sort of is unleashed today in society can be exploited and mobilized against democracy. And I think that's what we are witnessing right now. The uncertainty can, for example, be transformed into fear, which may lead to a new form of despotism. It can be exploited to favor love of homeland over love of democracy, or nostalgia instead of future. Or it can be exploited, and this is something that I point out in the book, to pit individuals against individuals in a competition for economic security and social status, which could mean that distinction between classes once again become as natural and as legitimate as they were during monarchy. Wrapping up, recall that for Montesquieu, the spirit is not only political, but it extends into the social. And so, I argue in this book, does democracy. To understand the corruption and renewal democracy, it is not enough to focus on peoples and institutions. We need to pay attention to the social sphere and policies on such things as education, citizenship, work, we can continue housing and so forth. This is where the real drama takes place, not in parliament when we talk about the corruption and renewal democracy. Because when these areas are dominated by a different principle than emancipation, for instance, patriotism or distinction and status seeking or fear, the democratic form risks being evacuated from within. So if this happens, the people may still be sovereign formally, and elections, human rights, and the public sphere may still serve as the core pillars of democracy. Nevertheless, the democracy may well be on the lost may lose its spirit. Well, the reason is that social policies in these areas are inciting actions and judgments that contravene the spirit of democracy. They're silently working in favor of a different political form. So to counteract the present corruption of democracy, we have to look at the social sphere. What is the spirit that is set into motion here? And as I argue in the book, I think that what has been created during the last 30, 40 years is a spirit of monarchy, basically. Supremacy, distinction, and so forth. So we have to look there. That's where the drama happens. So to conclude, uncertainty about the future is or can be a source of corruption, but it can also be a source of renewal, a time for a new democratic revolution. But to make it so, we need, first of all, to know what democracy is. And that it has been the task of this book to contribute to that end, to shift the idea of democracy from sovereignty to spirit. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Sophia. That's given us a good overview of the project for people to get their teeth into. So we'll move now to the first of our commentators, Mathias Koenig Archiboogie, who I'm losing my capacity to get the alphabet in the right order. The first of our commentators, who will be Jason Frank.
All right, thank you. And thanks, David, for the invitation to participate. And especially Sophia, thank you for this wonderful book. So Sofia Näsström's provocative new book, in ways that she just indicated, emerges from and also responds to the contemporary crisis of democracy. In nuanced engagements with thinkers from Rousseau and Montesquieu to Arendt, Lefort, and Rawls, she develops a distinctive argument that identifies first the underlying sources of contemporary democratic disaffection and pessimism, and second, delineates a new way forward towards democratic renewal. For Näsström, contemporary democracy is not threatened from without by external challenges to its normative hegemony, so much as it is imperiled from within by a deformation that lurks in the heart of the democratic imaginary itself, namely the way that democratic theorists and democratic citizens both orient themselves to the very foundation of democratic political life in the authorizing sovereignty of the people's will. Although Näsström does not put the point this way in the book, I think you could say that for her, popular sovereignty engenders what Lauren Berlant described as a pervasively cruel optimism. Popular sovereignty sets up impossibly high aspirations for democratic empowerment and popular control that then, when unattained, as they inevitably must be, leads to a pervasive sense of democratic failure and pessimistic disaffection. The political aspiration itself for popular sovereignty, in other words, here in the form of returning power to the people, becomes a primary obstacle to democratic flourishing. Popular sovereignty's cruel optimism fuels increasingly desperate and dangerous attempts to restore the people's sovereign power, fueling a further deepening of democratic disaffection, and on in an unvirtuous cycle toward ultimate disintegration and democratic decline. The book seems haunted on almost every page by the specter of resurgent populist movements on the right, fueled by claims to restore power to the real people, defined in racist, xenophobic, or religio-nationalist terms. So the book suggests the following: that a certain picture of democratic life holds us captive, and we cannot free ourselves from this because our primary democratic languages sustain that picture and repeat it to us inexorably. Popular sovereignty is itself the captivating picture which Sophia hopes to free her readers from. The only way to disenthrall ourselves from popular sovereignty's people trap, which is the term she uses in the book, is not to solve the theoretical and political problems that it presents, or to wrestle with the paradoxes of popular authorization that attend it, but to refuse their holding terms altogether and to, in some ways, therapeutically loosen their hold upon us. The problem space of popular sovereignty must be replaced with the problem space of spirit, and it is the ambitious task of the book as a whole to outline what this fundamental replacement and realignment entails. Now, I want to say that I learned a great deal from this book, and as a democratic theorist who remains committed to engaging historically with the very problem space that the book is trying to dispel as a captivating illusion, I did feel acutely the challenge of Näström's reorientation for democratic theory. In the brief time I have, I'm not going to try to defensively rebut some of the book's central claims, but I would like to spend a few minutes engaging with Näström's reconstruction of popular sovereignty's problem space, especially as it is canonically articulated by Rousseau, as a way of opening up larger theoretical and perhaps also political disagreements that might be taken up in further discussion. In order for Näström to make her argument about how the cruel optimism of popular sovereignty arises from Rousseau's people trap, she has to figure that problem in a particular way, one that is, to my mind, contestable. I would like to pose a few questions to that figuration and to also suggest briefly that there are alternatives that lie within it that go unattended in Sofia's presentation in the book. Okay, so as Näström just presented in her opening remarks, she takes primary theoretical inspiration in this book from Montesquieu, and I think alongside him, Hannah Arendt. But really, the theoretical nemesis of this book is Rousseau. It is above all Rousseau who sets the people trap in which contemporary democratic theorists and democratic citizens find themselves caught. And it is so through its contrast with Rousseau's work that the alternative path of spirit might be most clearly discerned. I'm not going to be able to do justice to her. She has a very nuanced engagement with Rousseau, but I do think that it is important to note at the outset that her engagement, while it is very critical, is not at all a caricature of Rousseau's position as a kind of earlier generation of Rousseau interpreters who tried to position his work as the primary theoretical resource and justification for things like the Jacobin Terror or the primary theoretical source of 20th century traditions of so-called democratic totalitarianism. That is not her approach. Instead, Näström turns to a central problem or paradox found in Rousseau's work that has been a productive site of contestation for a good deal of contemporary political theory. It is known by different terms: the boundary problem, the paradox of politics, the lawgiver problem, and it is a dilemma that Rousseau wrestles with in different ways across many of his texts, but it is canonically articulated in Book 2, Chapter 7 of the Social Contract. I'm just going to refer to it here as the paradox of democratic peoplehood, and it goes something like this. Deciding who makes up the authorizing sovereign people is a central but unavoidable question of democracy. But it is not a question that it can itself be democratically decided, because the very authority that would decide the question is what is yet to be determined. Now, while some democratic theorists, and I would include myself here, find this paradox of peoplehood a productive and generative source of democratic forms of contestation and political refiguration at different junctures in democratic history, Näström argues in the book that it engenders a disheartening awareness of democracy's failure to address one of its central and recurring problems, and it thereby drains democracy of the legitimacy necessary to sustain popular commitments to its renewal and rejuvenation across time. We must free ourselves, she writes, from the erroneous belief that the only way for democracy to regenerate itself is to undo itself. That's the end of the quote. So rather than dwelling in the productive ambiguity of this dilemma or looking at how it has emerged and been navigated in various historical contexts, Näström urges a more fundamental kind of critique. She wants to show that, quoting, "the fiction of the sovereign people is democratically averse all the way down," end of quote. To make this argument, Näström claims that accepting the bind of Rousseau's paradox, built around a fundamental commitment to the sovereign people, induces us to accept two dogmas of people-making that undo the very democratic premises that give birth to them. Two, the first one is that people making has a destabilizing impact on democratic politics, and 2, that it is determined by factors that are extraneous to democracy. So I'm going to say something very brief about each of these, because I don't think they follow as directly from the premise of of the paradox of peoplehood as Näsström suggests in the book, or at least I would like to hear a bit more elaboration or clarification before I would accept that argument. When Näsström writes that the paradox of peoplehood leads to destructive destabilizations of democratic politics, she has in mind crises of secession, like the example she provides of Catalonian independence, and the crises that threaten to invalidate the shared constitutional frame of democratic politics by throwing it into a fundamental legitimation crisis. But this framing of the problem seems to posit 2 already constituted political identities contesting the line of inclusion, while foreclosing the possibility of the emergence of new forms of political identity out of the very praxis of contestation around that line itself, and also sometimes mediated by a continuous but politically revised constitutional frame. Democratic theorists who envision a more politically and indeed democratically productive navigation of the paradox of peoplehood emphasize historical incipience and the emergence of new collectivities out of the popular practice of these political struggles themselves, rather than the kind of fight to the death contest between opposing but pre-constituted and presumably pre-political identities, which seems to be the focus of Näsström's book. Sofia does not seem to engage with this possibility much, and the question is, why not? Why do we have to infer the account of democratic destabilization that she outlines in the book? Now, the second dogma of people making that Sofia identifies is more familiar, but for that, I don't think any less problematic. It is where the significance of Rousseau's lawgiver comes into clear view. For her, the lawgiver models an appeal to what she calls anti-democratic stewardship to resolve or adjudicate the democratically unresolvable problem of peoplehood. If the people themselves cannot democratically resolve the paradox of democratic peoplehood, then anti-democratic sources of history, as in the arbitrary outcome of wars and civil wars, or of entrenched moral norms independent of the political process, or third, the discretionary power of the sovereign state must be called in to decide the question. For her, the lawgiver in Rousseau models the ultimate heteronomy that provides the necessary conditions of democratic autonomy. Here's Näsström. Precisely at the moment when the people should assist in the critique and renewal of democracy, namely when there are fierce conflicts over who we the people are, the people trap asks us to have trust in authorities beyond ourselves. Gone is the radical idea of people being able to judge and decide the purpose and direction of society. I also just don't agree with this interpretation of the lawgiver, or the way that it poses the problem of the complex interplay between autonomy and heteronomy as a simple abdication and trust in authorities beyond ourselves. Now, I'm not going to quote directly from Rousseau's text. This is not the time for that. But suffice it to say, I think the problematic there is how the people themselves come to confront and navigate this paradox, not by throwing up their hands in defeat and submitting to an external authority. The lawgiver has no authority, Rousseau states, to do what he sets out to achieve, but in wrestling with the immanent dynamics and self-development through conflict, which it is true is not fully autonomous in Rousseau's argument, but in which heteronomic supports are drawn upon to facilitate a kind of bootstrapping operation of a newly emergent people. They draw on resources, aesthetic, imaginary, traditional, mythic, and so on, that enable their own emergence. This is not a simple appeal to external authorities or anti-democratic stewardship, but a complication or a refusal of the simple opposition between democratic autonomy and heteronomic subordination. Beyond these theoretical disagreements, and here I'll wrap up, there may be broader differences in political orientation at stake here. I worry that the turn from the dilemmas of democratic peoplehood that Näsström suggests in the book to the problematic of democratic spirit risks not so much of an alternative path for democratic renewal as a possible evasion or deferral of the most difficult tasks that confront us all in a time of democratic crisis. There is a worry that seems to hum across the book's different chapters, that where popular authoritarians like Orban, Erdogan, Modi, and Trump, and on, have an easy time articulating the identity of the real people on whose authority they act, and can draw fully on the resources of deep and vital affective investments in popular identifications on religion, ethnicity, nationality, tradition, and myth, a counter-politics of emancipatory peoplehood is cut off from these deep sources of political affiliation, and so at an inherent disadvantage in navigating the democratic crisis of our time. This is a real concern. But I worry that in evading the questions of who we are and what we want to be, that these questions, to avoid them is impossible in a time of democratic crisis, and that it cedes too much political ground to the worst. Näsström's book poses these broader questions with great theoretical nuance and detail, and the challenge the book poses is one that must be taken up and confronted directly to accept the political responsibilities of the democratic crisis of our time. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you, and thank you, Sofia.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was really getting to grips with stuff, setting up lovely tension being set up there. Okay, so our second commentator is this time, right? Mathias Koenig, Archie Boogie. So Mathias, across to you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to read, think about, and comment on this very impressive book. And I should say at the beginning, as David was saying, introducing me, I'm an international relations scholar. I'm not a political theorist, and I say this for two reasons. First, to, in a way, already to make clear that my comments are not going to reach the level of sophistication that you would normally expect from political theorists, especially not matching the level of sophistication of this book, which is wonderful. The second reason is to also point at the fact that I was reading this book with, in a sense, my own agenda. So I think Sofia invites readers to, in a way, get out of more traditional, conventional ways of thinking about democracy. And I, in a way, tried to follow her on these paths. But on the other hand, maybe human nature, what it is, I also find myself going back to say, okay, what are the implications of her argument for what I am interested in, the kind of debates that I address and so on. And these debates are ultimately on the possibility of democratizing global politics. You know, can global politics, international institutions, interaction within states be more, in a way, in line with democratic principles? Is this possible? How is it possible? And so on. So nowadays, this topic, you know, despite the fact that there are, you know, people in this group that have actually written very important contribution to this topic, many people might doubt whether it's even worth raising. And, you know, some people might even think, you know, is it actually a good thing to do? And I just came across a few days ago on a quotation that I wanted to share with you. I just look at it because I want to. So this is basically Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov in anticipation of a meeting with his counterpart from China. So the Chinese ministry said, we together with you and with our sympathizers will move towards a multipolar, just democratic world order. Okay, so in a sense, at the moment, Russia presents itself as the forefront of a process of democratizing the world order. So talking about these topics is inherently kind of tricky and prone to misunderstandings. So this is the way that I approached the book, and I found in many parts very kind of tantalizing glimpses of the implications of Sofia's argument for this topic. There are, especially at the end of chapter 6, very interesting aspects. But ultimately, in a sense, there is no chapter on that, on international democracy per se. The closest she comes to addressing this issue is the chapter on citizenship, but most of the arguments are really about migration. So it's about people moving in a way and moving into states that are somehow already constituted, and about the policies, institutions, and so on that can make this movement democratically legitimized. It's full of interesting insights, so I recommend everybody should read that chapter, the whole book, but that chapter in particular. You know, I was impressed how she pointed at the risks of, you know, immigration policies that stressed virtues, distinctions that in a war, distinctions based on education and skills as a way of deserving entrance in a system, and what this could do for the quality of the relationship between citizens that are already in. So a kind of boomerang argument. So it's full of relevant, you know, and very topical issues, but ultimately, in a way, the chapter does not and is not meant to address questions like, you know, what do we do about climate change for people who are not migrating? What do we do about pandemics? What do we do about war, and especially nuclear war? So, you know, we are again in a situation where we have to contemplate these developments that could affect everyone. So I think the way that the books relate to this is by, you know, pointing at the so-called boundary problems. So how do we define the demos of democracies? But at some point, you know, at the end of chapter 6, Sofia is also clear that she doesn't want to take side in the debates about who is part of the demos, because she wants to do something else. She wants to, in a way, shift the debate from, you know, the aspect of the sovereignty of the people towards the spirit that should animate, that animates democracy as opposed to other political regimes. But on the other hand, she also says, well, kind of the conception rules something out. It rules out what she calls the enclosure model of citizenship, which says basically you have insiders who decide which outsiders to admit, and she considers this in a way not compatible with her understanding of democracy. And with it also she rejects the idea that there are sovereign people that can simply in a way decide borders among themselves. She kind of speaks about a new law on earth, referring to Arendt, but she doesn't in a way want to flesh out what the institutional settings or setups of this new law could look like. So in a sense, what have been trying to see is if there was an additional chapter, so to speak, what would it look like? And here my feeling is that perhaps Sofia could be a little bit too maybe defends the boundary between, you know, what she calls the nature of democracy debate, or who is part of the people and what the spirit of democracy is, perhaps a little bit too neatly. And I think this to me brings back to a discussion early in the book when she examines the democratic paradox of the constitution of the people. So basically, there is no way, the argument goes, of them deciding democratically who is member of the demos, because that generates an infinite regress. So she says that there have been three solutions to this problem, which she called the historical, the moral, and the decisionist, and all of them, in a sense, fail. And this failure generates the need to look elsewhere, to try to transcend this problem in a different way. And then this is the approach that she presents. So I want to speak a little bit more about what she calls about the moral approach, but I don't quite like this label very much for various reasons that I will say in a moment. So I've been trying to find a different label. And because Sofia mentions four scholars who have been maybe the main proponents of this approach, and they are Hans Agni, Jens Bartelsson, James Bowman, and Arash Abizadeh. So I just took the initials of those four scholars, A, B, B, A, and I decided to call it the ABBA model, which seems also appropriate considering that two of those scholars are Swedish. I should say I like this kind of label, but it's a little bit unfair to another musician who has actually addressed the problem more directly, because he sang about imagining there are no countries. So he would have a better claim at being identified with this model. But I also like the ABBA idea. So what is the ABBA idea? It's basically the infinite regress doesn't need to be there because it can be stopped. It stops at humanity. Okay, so just assume in a way that the whole of the humanity is appropriate adjudicator of boundary issues. Okay, so and this in a way solution comes naturally once you get rid of the idea that the demos needs to be bound. Okay, so once you say the demos can be unbound, this solution comes naturally. So Sofia says, and here the argument is a little bit perhaps too fast, says, well, it's not really convincing, this approach, because there is no particular logical reason why we should stop at humanity rather than the nation or European demos or some other. So basically the regress is not really solved in this way. And this is one of the bases for saying, let's move beyond the conception of democracy based on sovereignty of the people. But I think here there is a missed opportunity to perhaps create more of an alliance, if you like, between the ABBA conception and Sofia's own emancipation-based conception or spirit conceptions, because ultimately I think what the ABBA point is not so much about, in a way, what people want, but the democratic principle. So the drawing of boundaries is something that affects people deeply. I mean, I'm using the word affected, but as Sofia has, in important contributions explained, that's a problematic concept. It can be seen in different ways. But there's something that boundaries do to people, and they need to be able to shape decisions on the boundary. So I would say it's not a moral principle, it's a democratic principle to be able somehow to shape things that affect you deeply, that affect your opportunities, your interests, your life, your everything. So here the idea again is that if something affects you very deeply, then you need to be able to have a say on it. And this doesn't apply only to borders, but to any kind of boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries, claims to jurisdiction. So I think ultimately in a sense, the ABBA solution is a principle-based solution. Nobody can be excluded from these kind of decisions, but it's a democratic solution. So the way I've been thinking about this is whether, in a way, the two of them, in a way, can be combined. So can you somehow present essentially insert essentially the understanding of emancipation that Sofia develops in the book into this more kind of all-inclusive attitude. And my feeling is that kind of Sofia doesn't need to be neutral on this. Okay, so like she says, there are some conceptions that she rejects from an emancipation perspective of peoplehood. I think there is more of a natural affinity between her own emancipatory conception and the ABBA conception, the all-inclusive conception. And also this also means that, in a sense, if I can imagine how she would develop another chapter of the book about global organization, different ways of political organization of the world, I also think maybe this chapter, if developed ultimately, will come a little bit off the fence and end up defending a world state ultimately. So that's my hunch. But on the other hand, I also very much would like to hear what Sofia would say about this. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mathias. Now we finally turn to our last commentator, Nadia. So Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So thank you for inviting me to discuss and to reflect before discuss this very interesting book. I feel, of course, very close to the kind of argument she makes, Sofia makes, you makes actually, and the kind of spirited sense of value of democracy to be searched and to be looked for, not simply in institutions and procedures, not simply in the form of government, but in the social, educational, formational mentality of citizens operating in a democracy. So this is very important today. In some sense, it is an invitation, this book, also to go back to a tradition like pragmatism, which was looking for forming citizens while mobilizing them in social organizations or social life. So that is what I really like tremendously. And also, I would say, I feel very close to this idea of democracy as an unfinished business. Not simply institutional arrangements, but also the possibility of giving new voices and thus to have a transformative character on people and on itself. And thus, also, I have a very close feeling in favor of the fact that she makes fundamental to democracy the conviction that it is an ongoing process of emancipation and actually of self-emancipation, rather than a set of structures that has achieved it. So this sense of opening in all domains, this sense of, as she says several times actually, of governing and taming the uncertainty that is the open, that is open to all of us. This is the kind of approach that I really find extremely appealing and interesting. Now I have some minor observations, perhaps, I don't know whether they are critical or not, they are simply a reflection that I developed out of this, of my reading. There is nothing to do because the book is already written. So perhaps we simply like to discuss out of the reading of the book. And the first of my reflection that I propose to Sofia and to all of us is the following. I find extremely challenging and interesting to go back to Montesquieu in order to understand democracy, in order to give democracy a spirit that is a kind of systemic, propulsive source of power and reproduction of itself. Coming from Montesquieu is very interesting. It's very convincing also somehow. Yet Montesquieu, I would like to understand better from Sofia herself now, perhaps, how far is Sofia willing to follow Montesquieu? Meaning, I understand the method, and I would agree that is an interesting approach because it is a form of realism with some critical and normative aspect inside. Yet, I would like to understand better how far. Why I say so? Because when Sofia criticizes the poverty of an approach to democracy that is a procedural one, and I believe that there is a poverty in the only a procedural conception of democracy, yet Montesquieu is the founding father of this proceduralism, of modern conception of procedure. Why I say so? Because think about the way in which he dealt with virtue in relation to the Republic. He understands very well that virtue is very dangerous because in order to keep it on, you need to renew it all the time. So it is like love. You cannot stop loving if you want to love. You have to renew your love. And this is exactly the example he has in mind. In my view, it's caritas in the classical sense, meaning in order to have virtue, you needed to have a supererogation of virtue every time. And for this reason, it's very dangerous. And thus it transfers virtue from the individual engagement or a kind of civic engagement from there to institutions. So it becomes a kind of the virtue of institutions that is, they are capable of producing themselves by reproducing the system, like in the Newtonian universe, in which once you start the system, it goes on by itself, because there is this kind of virtuousness in the very force that keeps all together. So this is a way for neutralizing the more dangerous aspect of virtues. Now, I'm asking then, what is the counter order containing power capable of doing what Montesquieu did with virtue and do it with emancipation? You put emancipation at the core instead of virtue, as in a republic. In the republic, you put emancipation, rightly so, in a democracy. But if you are to follow Montesquieu, would you then tell more clearly what kind of limitation you need to put in this emancipation? Because emancipation is a never-ended game, and you cannot stop. Exactly similar to virtue. You cannot stop and declare that now we have emancipations and then we can start reproducing what we got. Because at that point you create oligarchies, you create privileges, you violate the principle of equality. So I would like better to understand in the conversation here the relationship between emancipation and equality at this point, and how emancipation can be reactivated all the time without destabilizing the entire system. So I'm asking you the very Montesquieuian question: how to deal with such a mobilizing force without demobilizing the system, and without, on the other end, stopping somewhere, because if you decide to stop somewhere the emancipation, you have changed the regime itself. Because if you stop, you create already an oligarchy, and this cannot be stopped by itself. So that is my first objection. It's not an objection, it's something genuinely difficult for me to understand what to do. The second connected to this is the following issue, in my view, at least. Now, you insist, rightly so, because you go back to the 18th century, where the shift from monarchy to democracy started. So you insist thus with the anti-monarchical moment in democracy. But I think, and perhaps this is what I would like to better understand also from, I think that the real altar to democracy is aristocracy or oligarchy, more than monarchy. And this is very, actually, it's something that Montesquieu would not like at all, because he was looking for an aristocratic moderation more than a democratic exaltation. But now, in my view, democracy is not so much opposite to monarchy. Okay, you discuss sovereignty. In this case, the monarchical sovereign versus the people king, kind of. This was the 18th century issue. Yet, if we analyze democracy, we see that the opposite more than monarchy, because a democracy can have a democratic leader, one. But the real danger comes from the few. The real battle is against oligarchy and aristocracy. Why? Because political power naturally congeals around the existing hierarchies. And democracy thus is a constant battle against this freezing of into a hierarchy, or in the stopping of emancipation, as we said before. That is the ongoing battle. I see the ongoing battle of democracy against oligarchy or aristocracy more than monarchy. And thus, and this was the reason why Athens was a genuine democracy, because it tried to break all the time the power of the wealthy few. Not by eliminating them, but by compelling them to obey the same laws made along with the many who were, generally speaking, poor. So democracy is perhaps more conducive or more in tune with the excluded many or the non-included poor than the few. Of course, this is the most important battle. And today, this battle is visible, in my view at least, in the difficulty our democracies have in preserving through time the equal distribution of political power by the subordination of economic, by keeping the economic power subordinated to the political one. And thus, this is the issue of corruption by money, by private money, and corruption by superabundant inequality in economic power. So in my view, this aspect needs to be stressed more than simply the issue of the monarchical sovereign one. The third issue I would like to, and I conclude with that, is the question of election. Now, I have a real strong agreement with you on correlating elections and lottery, and claiming that whereas lottery is the human acceptance of chance, election is the human control of future. This is great because exactly this shows the difference between subjecting to chance and instead acting in order to create and construct and control the future. So that is an important point, and I think you rightly so underline very much this aspect of election. Also, you underline importantly that election is democratic because it is democratic insofar as it is animated by the principle of emancipation, thus taming and shaping uncertainty. I would like to better understand from you here, so everybody can also participate in the conversation, how elections can be animated by, or can animate also, the principle of emancipation. Of course, is the voting power equal to all, one head, one vote, fine. Of course, is the principle of majority counting, fine. Yet elections is not voting, and elections is not majority. So what is that makes elections possible to be combined with the or to be translated according to the principle of emancipation? I say so because you rightly stress, along with Manin or other authors of the 18th century, the origin of elections are in the attempt to moderate if not to exclude the people from participation by introducing element of moderation, like virtue, competence, responsibility, distinction. And Montesquieu was very happy with this moderating process or strategy. So I would bet it's hard for me to understand the connection between election and emancipation. I understand the process for achievement of the universal suffrage or achievement the right to inclusion in the demos. That is a moment of great emancipation. Once you have elections, you need something else to transform this game of electoral selection into a permanent process of emancipation. You need other things. You need, formation of opinion. The right to associations, the right to participate, the right to speak on matters of public concern, the right to achieve or use political power. So the three great equalities of the ancients, isonomia, isegoria, isocracia, you need all of that in order to make elections not do the job that they were intentionally used to make, meaning to contain and to limit the emancipatory power of democratic politics. So, in my view, that would be interesting to better understand. And in some sense, it goes together with the question of opinion formation, the question of public discourse as one of the main features that characterize and give and gives value to democratic politics. How this is connected to the making of our representative democracy. Is still the public square of the ancients a good metaphor, or instead, because of the technological innovations in the opinion formation, the metaphor is the metaphor of the theater, in which we play some roles, particularly political candidates, particularly public figures in the arena, and we are simply spectators or an audience, in a condition that is not completely one of passivity, but certainly is a condition of attendance or a public that controls, but not a public that participates in self-emancipation. So at the end, I don't want to abuse of my time. Would be very interesting to continue the conversation on this aspect of elections. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Nadia. Okay, we have about 23 minutes. I would like to bring in some people from discussion, but Sofia, we should come back to you for any kind of, relatively brief thoughts that you have in relation to Jason, Mathias, and Nadia's comments.
Do you want me to do that now? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to be very, very nice questions and problematizations from the three of you. I'm very happy with your comments. I've written it down. Starting with Nadia and with the question of moderation. Of course, for Montesquieu, moderation is crucial. That's why he's often said of being before monarchy. So how can, is emancipation dangerous for democracy, and how can it limit it? Well, I think there is a process of, a mechanism of self-limitation in a democracy, in the sense that, and the self-limitation consists in the fact that no one governs, and the fact that peoples and institutions make sure that no single person can appropriate power and wield it to further their own interests. So there is, movements and institutions, peoples, they are the assurance by making sure that natural persons or groups does not appropriate power. And I think that's an internal self-correction or self-limitation, kind of self-limitation in a democratic system, not of the kind, separation of power, but within the democratic system that can work. Well, democracy is not opposed to monarchy, but it's more a way of trying to understand what happens in the shift from monarchy to democracy. Yes, but I agree that since I separate out democracy from republic, monarchy, and despotism, I do not address in the idea of the republic when Montesquieu talks about oligarchic versus what he calls the more democratic. And it's true that I don't address it as much as I could do, because I totally agree with you that elitism or technocratic elitism and money has become one of the important, contestants to democracy. Election, yes, how can election be emancipatory? Two things there. Of course, election has to be about movements and parties, about connecting to people's concerns. It has to be something that you've written about, also more time. Right now we have opinion polls that, one of the things that I stress here is that we must have enough time and space to judge and decide for ourselves in the absence of God or some clever guy or a strong authority. And right now the opinion polls creates a tyranny of novelty. It's such a stress. Also the media ecology becomes very important. If it's a matter of sports, that's a problem. and all the focus on leaders, not parties, but leaders, and a focus on them. As you know, you hear party leaders asking, what do we need the members for? What are they for? We don't need them anymore. So that's a problem. But there's another thing, and that has to do with the election are nationally constrained. And a lot of people who go and vote nowadays, their concerns are global. Migration, climate change, digitalization. And when they go vote for a particular leader in Sweden, for instance, they know that that person or that party doesn't have the power to how to say, influence those things. So there is a crisis for elections, not only in the sense that it has been movement, but where it takes place. There's a discrepancy between what we want to influence and the electoral. And right now, there's a kind of race to the bottom where it creates sort of contempt for politicians and contempt for democracy. Democracy looks weak, cannot deal with these questions. And maybe that comes back to what Mathias was talking about, that maybe we need something on another level. Very shortly also, Mathias, very nice comments. I think I covered those questions. And ABBA, yes, ABBA. No, so I think the popular sovereignty blocks a rethink of democracy towards a more global. And I think that all effective principle, all subjective principle, there are a lot of people involved in discussing who are, or how do we judge who we the people are in times of secession, globalization, and so forth. And these principles are candidates for that. But they all deal with the question of the nature of politics, who governs and how. I think a more interesting question is in what spirit people engage in question of secession, for instance. So if there are different, people involved in a conflict on secession, in what spirit do they engage in that question? Is it to protect the country and law? Is it patriotism? Is it distinction? They want to earn money, as you say, that, it has to do with, we want to secede in order because our economy is better, or is it because uncertainty, or it's because of sharing, trying to create institutions that better alleviates and tames uncertainty by sharing and dividing it equally. So I think that by asking that question, by looking at the spirits, we may arrive at a different way of understanding global politics. You don't have to go for the world state. So my concern in this book is more like, what principle do we turn back to judge what is a democratic claim or not? So I'm not all for world state, but of course, I think that in what you are playing in the extension of this book, what I want to see are more institutions at the global level, of course, trying to cope with new challenges and uncertainties that national electoral apparatus cannot deal with. And finally, Jason, on the popular sovereignty, I'm not against people, but I'm not critical of the concept of people, but the idea of sovereign people. So as you nicely put it, I think that the sovereign people is what creates this idea of destabilization, in the sense that if we hold on to it, we get the impression, as many democratic theorists say, that democracy has no way to adjudicate conflicting claims on who we the people are. And right now, there are many adjudicating claims on who we the people are. Many leaders, parties claiming to speak for the people. How do we judge between them? If we just hold on to popular sovereignty, well, let the sovereign people decide. It's a non-answer. So what I'm trying to do is to say that, well, maybe we should ask for the spirit behind it in order to judge, is this claim a democratic claim? Are these movements democratic movements? Is this leader doing something for democracy? So I think that my concern is, I don't think that popular sovereignty is so radical. It's not, we disagree there, but I'm trying to understand what is the spirit that we must go back to in order to judge whether peoples and their representatives are working in favor of a more emancipatory and democratic world or not. And I think that popular sovereignty doesn't give us that, doesn't give us that tool or that source of judgment in order to do that. And that's my concern. Yeah, very shortly.
Thank you, Sophia. Now, I just want to ask if the host can stop the recording at this